In the hush of twilight, the coastline was draped in swirling patterns of rain and wind. The sea roiled, pummeling the rocky shore with waves that rose like wrathful giants. Overlooking this tempest stood the old lighthouse, its beam slicing the darkness with dependable measured sweeps, guiding ships to safety. Inside, Caleb, the solitary keeper, watched the horizon anxiously through the window. He knew the storm churned more fiercely than any in recent memory. The clang of the heavy rain against the tower's walls had begun before nightfall, and the lightning shattered the sky in brilliant bursts. Every ounce of his training told him this would be a night of harsh trials. Still, he felt a strange anticipation, as though the thunder carried a secret promise. His faithful routine had been set for years, checking the lantern's mechanisms, ensuring the beam continued to cut through the gloom, and warming himself by the fire in between turns at the watch. Each crashing wave seemed to echo within the walls of his mind, but he was unafraid. Often he felt a deep kinship with the tumult of nature, as though his own spirit resonated with the storm's primal energy. Under the constant flashes of lightning, the sea appeared silver and the swirling clouds formed ghostly silhouettes. In calmer weather, fishing boats dotted the horizon. Now the ocean was barren, as though it had swallowed everything in its path. The clamorous night did little to quell the swirl of memory within him. He had come to this lighthouse after a tragedy, a misfortune that had led him to seek solitude in the rhythmic, ceaseless labor of keeping the beacon lit. Here, he had found a modicum of peace in the constancy of his duties, focusing on the quiet intervals between wave crests for solace. However, this storm felt different. There was an unmistakable tension in the air, a sense that something was coming. And even as rain battered the windows and wind howled with a banshee's fury, he peered through the darkness, wondering if he would see a shape in need of rescuing. A sharp knock sounded at the door, nearly lost in the wind's wail. Caleb froze for a moment, uncertain if he had imagined it. Then it came again, a frantic rapping that sent his heart lurching. Snatching up his lantern, he descended the spiral staircase, moving as quickly as he dared on the slick steps. When he pulled open the heavy wooden door, he was greeted by a drenched figure, cloak plastered to their body, face half concealed under a hood. Lightning flashed, illuminating a pair of wide, desperate eyes. As swiftly as his shock allowed, he beckoned the traveler inside. The figure, shivering from head to toe, stumbled into the relative warmth of the lighthouse's entryway. In the flicker of the lantern, Caleb could see the traveler was a woman, exhaustion etched into her pale features. She clung to her sodden cloak, water dripping onto the stone floor in small rivulets. Her voice came out choked and thin. I'm sorry to intrude. The road collapsed, and there's nowhere else." Caleb quickly helped her remove the heavy outer layer, glimpsing beneath it a simple woolen dress, soaked through as well. "There's no intrusion," he assured her gently. "Come, sit by the fire. You must be freezing." Guiding her with a warm yet firm touch, he led her to the small hearth near the center of the ground floor. Its flames danced and crackled, promising comfort against the storm's ravages. As she sank onto a small wooden stool, relief deepened her eyes. She muttered her thanks, her hands extended shakily toward the fire. Despite the weariness that weighed on her, there was something luminous about her presence, like a faint glow in the darkest night. Caleb found himself torn between wanting to help her and, quite selfishly, wanting to prolong her stay. He gently placed a folded blanket around her shoulders. "I'm Caleb," he said quietly, leaning nearer so she could hear over the roar of the storm. "I'm Eleanor," she replied after a moment. Her voice, though soft, carried a resilience that made him look at her with admiration. "I lost my way. My horse got spooked, and I had to walk." Her gaze flicked to the relentless rain hammering the window pane, and she shuddered. "Don't worry," Caleb said, standing tall in the firelight. "The storm can't get in here. I'll make some tea. I think we both need something to chase away the chill." While the kettle heated, Eleanor shifted closer to the flames, her shivering only slowly ebbing away. As the minutes stretched on, they simply watched the swirling tempest outside. Meeting a stranger in such dire conditions felt surreal, yet the warmth between them was immediate. When he finally returned holding two steaming cups, she accepted hers gratefully, letting the fragrant heat climb into her fingertips. Lightning flickered, and thunder shook the walls, but inside, for that moment, they found stillness in the flickering glow of the hearth. After her initial tremors subsided, she began to speak more openly. The storm's ceaseless roar created an unexpected sense of intimacy. Her story poured out in cautious pieces. She was traveling to see her gravely ill mother in a town many miles away. Her plan had been to stay at an inn, but the weather had turned far worse than predicted. Her horse bolted and the path gave way. Desperation drove her to follow the beam of light shining from the lighthouse. She had no idea if she'd be welcomed, but it was the only shelter for miles around. Caleb listened, concern etched on his face. He understood the weight of family obligations, though his own had fractured many years ago. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, leaning forward, arms braced on his knees. "We can try to send word from the nearest village in the morning, but it's impossible tonight. The roads are likely flooded or blocked by fallen debris." Eleanor nodded, sipping her tea. "I just hope my mother can hang on a little longer," she said, voice tight. "I can't bear the thought of—" Her resolve wavered and she set the cup down, eyes rimmed with tears. "This storm couldn't have come at a worse time. I feel so helpless." Caleb reached across the small space and placed his hand gently over hers. The simple gesture offered unspoken compassion. "You're not alone," he said reassuringly. "The storm will pass, and when it does, I'll help in any way I can. Tomorrow I can guide you to the main road or see if we can find your horse." She placed her other hand on top of his, drawing strength from the contact. Though she had wandered in as an exhausted stranger, she was beginning to feel a bond with him, forged in adversity. The sincerity in his blue-gray eyes was like a steady anchor, calming the restless tide of her worry. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've given me more kindness than I deserve." In the glow of the hearth, their quiet connection grew. Caleb stoked the embers, coaxing them to burn warm and steady. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside those stone walls, there was a blossoming sense of peace. Neither of them could know how profoundly the night's tempest would change their lives. Much later, the gale showed no signs of abating. Caleb insisted Eleanor rest. He offered her his modest cot in a small alcove behind the storeroom, but she refused. "You let me in out of nowhere," she said with a gentle stubbornness. "I won't take your bed. I'll nap in your chair or on the floor. I'm used to travel and rough conditions." He shook his head firmly. "My bed is a thin mattress stuffed with straw, not a feather bed. You won't be doing me any harm. And I can manage just fine in that chair. I've slept in it on many restless nights. Please, don't argue." Even as he spoke, he could see her exhaustion returning in the slump of her shoulders. They settled the matter by compromise. She would take the cot for a portion of the night, and they would swap if the storm continued and neither could fully rest. A small oil lamp glowed from the kitchen corner, casting dancing shadows along the walls. Eleanor removed her boots, now nearly dry, and let her head fall onto the pillow. Though the wind shrieked outside, she felt a rare sense of security, lulled by the smell of salt in the air and the gentle scraping of Caleb's chair as he slipped away to resume tending the lighthouse's beam. Alone with his thoughts on the tower's upper level, Caleb tried to steady the spinning in his chest. His life had been unchanging for so long. He had never felt alone before, not truly, because he had chosen this path of solitude. Yet as he watched the bright light sweep across the raging ocean, he found himself longing for something more than the rhythmic comfort of routine. In the mere hours since Eleanor had arrived, he felt a stirring in himself, a subtle shift that made him see his own life anew. Part of him worried about letting someone in, about risking intimacy after having lost so much. but the thought was tempered by the way her eyes lit up when she spoke, and the way her voice carried a gentle resolve despite her predicament. He was no stranger to storms, but this one felt like a crucible, forging a bond neither of them had anticipated. And so he worked through the night, making sure the bright sweep of the lantern never faltered, while below, Eleanor found a moment of respite. Occasional previews of dawn tinged the margins of the sky, but the storm showed no sign of calm. His heart pounded with every thunderclap, and yet a part of him felt more alive than it had in years. Sunrise came in a gray swirl of retreating clouds. The rain began to slow, tapering off to a miserable drizzle, while gusts of wind knocked at the windows like insistent fists. Caleb prepared a simple meal, salted fish, bread, and a bit of jam he had managed to preserve. When Eleanor emerged from her brief rest, she looked more composed, though shadows still lingered beneath her eyes. They ate together in companionable silence, each nibbling at their food while their minds reeled with the weight of the storm's aftermath. Finally, Eleanor cleared her throat. "It's light now. We should see the damage, figure out if I can continue on." Caleb nodded, though concern creased his brow. He opened the lighthouse door cautiously, bracing against the strong breeze. Beyond the threshold, the world was drenched. The path leading down to the narrow beach was littered with branches, stones, and washed-up seaweed. Water pooled everywhere, reflecting the angry clouds overhead. Further inland, the road that had once wound along the cliffs was half buried under muddy debris. The landscape bore the scars of the storm's relentless fury. Eleanor stood by Caleb's side, the wind tousling her hair. Her face fell as she surveyed the wreck. "I can't travel on foot in this," she said, voice trembling slightly. "My horse is probably miles away by now. It might take a full day, maybe two, to clear the road." Caleb stepped forward, testing the stability of the ground. "But let's see if we can find a safer path. The storm has weakened, so we might at least check the surrounding area for your horse or a stable path." They set off together, carefully navigating the sodden terrain. At times, the clouds parted and a feeble sun cast a silvery sheen on the lingering fog. They talked occasionally, exchanging memories of lands traveled and hardships faced. Each word felt significant, as though they were weaving a tapestry of fledgling trust. "Why did you become a lighthouse keeper?" she asked at one point, stepping over a fallen branch. "Most men crave more excitement, or they stay in their home villages." He paused, watching her with a reflective frown. "I lost my wife and child when my fishing boat capsized during a storm," he said. His tone was measured, as though each word carried a hidden weight. "It was my fault. I took them out on a brief holiday, but the weather turned faster than I anticipated. I believed I could outrun it." He closed his eyes for a moment, the memory still raw even after years. "I vowed that no one else should be lost at sea because of a failing beacon, or because they couldn't find shelter in time. So I came here." A tender sadness filled Eleanor's eyes. She laid a hand on his arm. "You've given safety to so many," she said. "Thank you for telling me." He met her gaze, haunted but grateful, and they resumed their search. The absence of her horse troubled them, and the roads were impassable. At one point, they found hoofprints in the muddy track, but it led to a dead end blocked by a collapsed section of the cliff. Hope waned, and ultimately, with the drizzle picking up again, they headed back. That second evening, the two of them dried off in the lighthouse once more. Eleanor busied herself helping him prepare dinner, insisting she repay his kindness in some small way. Though the meal was simple, thin stew supplemented with leftover bread, they laughed over the smoky flavor, byproduct of a pot precariously perched over the fire. They found lightness in the mundane tasks, slicing vegetables, pouring water, setting the table, a domesticity that felt almost like a glimpse into another life. Between them stretched an undercurrent of shared vulnerability. The splash of rain against the stone walls, the swirl of the lamp's glow, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more uncertainty only served to amplify the intensity of their connection. Eleanor spotted a worn fiddle on a high shelf and asked if Caleb played. He hesitated, half embarrassed, but with some gentle coaxing, he took it down. The strains of a slow, melancholy melody filled the air, weaving a sense of longing. Eleanor listened, transfixed. Despite his initial reluctance, the notes that emerged were stirring and poignant, as if each were a tether between the past and the present. She closed her eyes, letting the music carry her away from fear, away from sorrow. When he finished, a heavy hush fell. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "I never knew a single instrument could create such feeling." He looked at her, a sad smile on his lips. "It was my wife's favorite tune," he admitted softly. "I've barely touched the fiddle since. I'm out of practice." "To me, it sounded perfect," she said, her voice low. An unexpected impulse made her reach for his hand. "Thank you for sharing it." In that quiet moment, they both felt the shift. The storm had thrust them together by chance, but something deeper than chance now held them in its embrace. When lightning flashed in the distance, it no longer carried fear. Instead, it lit the interior of the lighthouse like a soft glow, revealing how each felt more alive when they were close. Late into the night, the wind whipped up once more, and the storm renewed with fresh vigor. Thunder rolled across the sky, startling them out of the soft conversation they had been sharing at the table. Concern flickered in Eleanor's eyes. "It's coming back," she noted, hugging her arms around herself. Caleb rose. "I'll head upstairs to check the beacon. Could you stay down here? If you hear anything, any strange rattling or pounding, call me immediately. Water sometimes gets in through the shutters in a gale like this." She nodded, glancing at his face with worry. "Be careful." He ascended the twisting staircase, lantern in hand. Up there, the tower swayed ever so slightly, a reminder of the force of nature outside. Rain slammed against the narrow windows, while the lamp's rotation continued in its patient cycle. Caleb checked the oil, verified the mechanism, tightening a few screws in the gear. All was as it should be, but the fury of the storm returned with a vengeance. Lightning forked across the sky, revealing the churning black sea below. Strangely, he felt no fear now. Looking down the stairs, he knew Eleanor was below, waiting in the welcoming glow of the fire. The warmth of her presence dispelled the loneliness that had once hung over him. Even amid the roaring squall, he felt calm. The light that shone through the night felt like a metaphor for what he was experiencing, guiding him through darkness, teaching him that hope could flicker into one's life at the least expected moment. He descended to find her standing at the base of the steps, arms slightly wrapped around herself, face illuminated by the lamp at her shoulder. "Everything all right up there?" she asked softly. He smiled, nodding. "Yes, the beacon is fine." In the flicker of the fire, the distance between them vanished, and he realized how easily he could lose himself in her gaze. Something stirred within him, an impulse that had been kindled by distance, by adversity, and now crackled to life like a spark. The storm raged outside. Towards midnight, fatigue encroached again. The howling winds battered the thick walls. But inside, Caleb and Eleanor found a gentler rhythm, an unspoken agreement in how they moved about the confined space, a synergy in how they anticipated each other's needs. Warm tea was made without request, blankets offered without words. When a floorboard creaked, they shared amused smiles. When thunder shook the roof, they instinctively drew together as if to protect one another from the crack. In the midst of the second night, sleep was elusive. In the small circle of lamplight, they talked quietly, revealing pieces of their pasts. Eleanor recounted simpler times with her mother, how they would gather wildflowers behind their cottage, how her mother's health had waned. She confessed her regret at not visiting earlier. "I kept telling myself there was time," she whispered sorrowfully. "I never thought I'd have to race against a storm to see her." Caleb recognized the guilt in her eyes. He felt it too, a memory of regrets he could never silence. "We do what we can," he said gently, folding her hand in his own. and sometimes we're only shown our path by the storms that confront us. His words were earnest, born of personal struggle, and she squeezed his hand in gratitude for his empathy. In the hush that followed, another sound emerged, the dull roar of waves pressing ceaselessly against the cliffs. They rested near one another, the room lit only by the smoldering embers in the hearth. The storm's fury pulsed outside, but next to each other, a calm took hold. Caleb leaned back against the wall, letting Eleanor's head rest against his shoulder. As her eyelids drooped, he wondered if his heart could bear releasing her back to her journey once the roads cleared. A sense of longing ached in him. Though they had met only a day before, it felt as though they had shared a lifetime's worth of confidences, and he understood that something precious was forming in the silence between drumming raindrops and flickering flames. The next morning, the worst of the storm passed. The wind died down to a restless murmur, and the precipitation shifted to a faint, drifting mist. The sky was still overcast, but dawn did its best to break through the oppression. Caleb and Eleanor ventured out once again to assess conditions. This time, their efforts at clearing debris were more successful. Working side by side, they moved branches and loosened stones to create a rough path. They encountered a local villager who had braved a trek along the coastal route to survey damage. With his help, they learned of a half-flooded road that connected to the main route inland. Eleanor's eyes shone with relief. She looked at Caleb, gratitude shining in her expression. "If it's passable, I should get through by foot or with a borrowed horse from the village stable," she said. "I need to get to my mother by any means possible." He swallowed, aware this meant their time was short. "Let me escort you," he offered. "Once you're safely on your way, I'll return to the lighthouse." She hesitated, wanting to accept, yet torn by the thought of him leaving his post. At the same time, their bond tugged at her heart with unexpected intensity. "Are you certain? Your duties—" "I'll manage," he assured her softly. "I'll set the beacon. It runs on its own for quite some time, as long as the oil is full and the mechanism is wound. I tracked the supply carefully. I'd like to make sure you're safe." A flicker of emotion passed between them. Eleanor nodded, touched by his devotion. They gathered supplies, a small pack with food, fresh water, and a lantern in case the weather turned again. Before they left, Caleb paused by the lighthouse's giant lens, adjusting the feed and polishing the glass with methodical care. As she observed how seriously he took every small detail, she felt her heart swell. This was a man who tended to his tasks with reverence because he knew the weight of a life saved or lost. They journeyed north along the muddy coastal road, stepping cautiously where the ground was soft. The sea still churned ominously to their left, and the wind blew a salty chill into their faces. Yet with Caleb at her side, Eleanor found her courage renewed. His presence was a constant reassurance, like the faint glow of the lighthouse still visible in the distance behind them. When they reached the village, mud-splattered but uninjured, the local stablemaster was more than willing to lend Eleanor a sturdy mare. He recognized the urgency in her request and offered a bit of guidance on the quickest route inland. Caleb chatted briefly with the stablemaster as Eleanor mounted the horse, adjusting the stirrups. The man then asked, "You continuing with her or heading back?" The question hung in the air. Caleb looked up at Eleanor, saw how the wind teased strands of her dark hair around her determined face. Every instinct in him shouted to stay at her side, to see her safely to her mother's door, but he was needed back at the lighthouse. He thought of passing ships and the vow he had made years ago. "I should return," he said quietly, wrestling with the choice. "I need to keep the light." A flash of disappointment crossed her features, but she understood. She leaned down from the saddle, her voice tinged with sadness. "Thank you for everything, Caleb, for saving me." A subtle crack formed in his resolve, each breath tightening his chest. "You saved me, too," he said softly. Then, to the stablemaster, "Please ensure she has everything she needs for the journey." Eleanor's eyes glistened. Without another word, she reached for Caleb's hand. He clasped hers firmly, and a stretch of silence passed between them, loaded with unspoken feeling. At length, she gently let go. Turning the horse's head, she began down the road. Caleb stood watching until the fading outline of horse and rider was swallowed by the mist. The days that followed brought gradual calm. The sea resumed its gentle oscillation, and the damages left by the storm were steadily repaired by the villagers. Fishing boats once again dotted the horizon. The lighthouse remained vigilant, its constant beam slicing through night's darkness. Caleb performed his tasks with the same devotion, but every swirl of wind carried a trace of memory, echoing the hush of Eleanor's voice. He caught himself gazing at the battered chair where she had rested, recalling her laughter or the gentle curve of her smile. At twilight, he climbed the tower and watched the road where she had vanished. Each day, a small hope flared that she might return. He knew she had pressing family matters and that her life called her elsewhere, yet the space she had filled for that short time lingered, and he could not dismiss the sense that her arrival had altered his own destiny. A few weeks passed before he heard the rattle of a carriage on the newly repaired road. Heart thudding, he hurried down from the watch. At the door stood Eleanor, looking tired but radiant, holding a small satchel. She set it down at her feet, then stepped forward, her smile tentative, yet filled with relief. "My mother is better," she announced. "She pulled through." He realized he was holding his breath and let it out in a whoosh. Joy surged inside him, and he stepped onto the threshold. "That's wonderful." Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "I couldn't stop thinking about you, about how you took me in, and I realized I didn't want to simply say goodbye forever, not after everything that happened." A rush of gratitude, affection, and relief spilled through him. Without hesitation, he reached for her, drawing her close. She came willingly, resting her head against his shoulder, as though it was the one safe harbor she had longed for. The crash of the sea, the call of the gulls, and the gentle hush of the wind became the backdrop to their reunion. As he held her in his arms, Caleb felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, and for the first time in years, his breath came freely, unhindered by regrets. The old wounds were still there, but they no longer ached quite so fiercely. New possibilities glimmered in the corners of his mind. Perhaps solitude was not the inevitable price he had to pay. Perhaps the guiding light that had always been meant for others had become a way for him to find his own path, too. They lingered next to each other at the lighthouse door as if reluctant to let go. Then, hand in hand, they stepped inside into the familiar warmth of the lantern's glow and the promise hidden in the hush of the waves. There, in the place that had seen both sorrow and salvation, they began a new chapter, united by the love that had kindled in the eye of the storm.